In the winter of 2012, deep in the frozen farmlands of Quebec, Canada, a machine was running. It was a Heidelberg offset printing press, a massive 4-tower beast of German engineering that weighed as much as a tank. It was hidden inside a nondescript, rusting barn, surrounded by snow and silence. Inside that barn, a man named Frank Bourassa was doing something that should have been impossible. He wasn't printing newspapers. He wasn't printing flyers. He was printing the United States $20 bill. And he wasn't just making good fakes. He was making perfect fakes. His bills had the correct watermarks. They had the security strips. They had the color-shifting ink that changes from copper to green when you tilt it. The paper felt crisp, with that distinct snap that real money makes. Frank Bourassa was printing money faster than the U.S. Treasury. In a matter of months, he printed $250 million. It was enough cash to fill a shipping container. It was enough to destabilize the economy. It was the largest counterfeiting operation in the history of North America. The U.S. Secret Service, the agency tasked with protecting the president and the currency, was baffled. They assumed this was the work of a hostile government, maybe North Korea, maybe Russia, or a sophisticated cartel with billions in funding. They had no idea it was a high school dropout in a hoodie, working 16 hours a day in a freezing barn, eating microwave dinners. And the craziest part of this story isn't the crime, it's the escape. When the police finally kicked down his door, they had him cold. He was looking at 60 years in an American supermax prison. His life was effectively over. But Frank Bourassa didn't go to prison. He walked into the courtroom, looked the prosecutors in the eye, and made them an offer they couldn't refuse. He walked away with a fine of $1,350, cheaper than the price of a used Honda Civic. This is the insane true story of the world's greatest counterfeiter. Born in Trois-Rivières, Quebec, Frank was a problem child from day one. He possessed a high IQ, but had zero patience for authority. He looked at the world and saw a game that was rigged against the little guy. While other kids were studying for math tests, Frank was studying systems. He wanted to know how things worked so he could break them. By his teenage years, he was already running small-time scams. He started with shoplifting clothes. Then he moved on to stealing car parts. By his 20s, he was importing illegal marijuana into the U.S. But Frank had a problem with the drug trade. It was messy. It involved unreliable people. It involved violence. And most importantly, the supply chain was a nightmare. You had to grow the product, harvest it, transport it, and sell it. Frank sat in his apartment one night and had a revelation.
Why am I working so hard to get a product, to sell that product, to get money? Why don't I just cut out the middleman and make the money?
It sounds like a stone thought a teenager would have. But Frank was serious. He looked at a $20 bill. He didn't see a symbol of government power. He saw a manufactured product. It was ink on paper. If it was made by humans, it could be replicated by humans. He chose the $20 bill for a very specific reason. The $100 bill is the prestige bill. Cashiers check it. They hold it up to the light. They use the marker pen. But the $20? The $20 is the workhorse of the economy. You use it to buy gas. You use it to buy lunch. You get it out of an ATM. Nobody looks twice at a 20. It is invisible. Frank decided he was going to flood the world with invisible 20s. But to do that, he needed to become a master of chemistry, engineering, and supply chain logistics. He spent the next 2 years doing nothing but research. He went to the U.S. Secret Service website. He downloaded every PDF, every guide, every technical document on currency security. Ironically, the government's guide on how to spot a fake became Frank's manual on how to make a fake. He learned that there are 3 main components to a bill: the paper, the ink, and the printing. And he realized immediately that the ink and the printing were solvable. But the paper? The paper was going to be a nightmare. Most counterfeiters fail because of the feel. We don't realize it, but our fingers are incredibly sensitive. We handle money every day. If you are handed a piece of photocopy paper, your brain instantly knows it's wrong. It feels dead. It feels flat. U.S. currency is not printed on wood pulp paper. It is printed on a fabric blend, 75% cotton, 25% linen. This is why money doesn't disintegrate in the washing machine. You cannot buy this paper at Staples. You cannot order it on Amazon. The production of this specific blend is strictly controlled by the U.S. government and a company called Crane & Co., which has held the contract since 1879. If Frank wanted to succeed, he couldn't just find similar paper. He needed the exact paper. So, Frank Bourassa decided to do something audacious. He created a fake identity. He built a website for a fake investment firm. He hired a receptionist to answer calls. He began contacting paper mills in Europe and Asia. He spun them a story. He told them,
My client is a large investment bank. We are issuing secure corporate bonds. We need a paper that is durable, high security, and conveys trust.
He sent them the specifications: 75% cotton, 25% linen, specific weight, specific thickness. Most mills ignored him. Some said it was too close to currency, but finally he found a mill in Switzerland. They were hungry for business. They didn't ask too many questions. They said, "We can make this blend, but we have a minimum order requirement." The minimum order was massive. They wouldn't make a few sheets. They needed to make industrial rolls. Frank didn't blink. He ordered tons of paper. The cost was roughly $40,000. It was a huge investment for a criminal, but Frank treated it like a startup cost. But he had another problem: the security features. Real money has a security strip, that little plastic thread embedded inside the paper that glows under UV light. And it has a watermark, the ghostly face of Andrew Jackson that you can only see when you hold it up to a light. Frank couldn't ask the Swiss mill to put Andrew Jackson's face in the paper. That would be an immediate red flag. They would call Interpol. So, Frank got creative. He looked at the design of the $20 bill. He realized the watermark was simply an image of a face. He told the Swiss mill,
Our client wants a watermark of a classical Roman senator to represent strength and stability.
He sent them a custom design. It looked like a Roman senator, but if you squinted, the nose, the eyes, and the hair were perfectly aligned with Andrew Jackson. The mill accepted it. Now, the security strip. This was the hardest part. The strip in a US $20 says USA 20 in tiny text. Frank couldn't print that. So he told the mill,
We need a security strip that says USA for Universal Security Associates, and 20 to represent the 20-year bond maturity.
It was a flimsy lie, a terrible lie. But the mill wanted the money. They agreed. When the shipment arrived at the port in Montreal, Frank was sweating. This was the choke point. If Canadian Customs opened the container, saw the watermarks, and felt the paper, he was going to prison for a long time. He sat in his car, watching the port from a distance with binoculars. The truck rolled out. No police escort, no sirens. He had done it. He had the raw materials to print $250 million. Now he needed a factory. He couldn't do this in the city. The smell of the chemicals and the noise of the press would alert the neighbors instantly. He drove out to the small town of Trois-Rivières. He found an isolated farm owned by an older man. Frank told him he was starting a legitimate printing business for advertising flyers and needed a cheap space. He paid the farmer in cash 6 months in advance. The barn was perfect. It was set back from the road. No neighbors. Now, the machine. You can't print high-quality currency on an inkjet printer. You need an offset press. This is a machine that uses metal plates to transfer ink onto a rubber blanket, which then rolls it onto the paper. It allows for microscopic precision. Frank bought a Heidelberg 4-color press. This machine is the size of a large SUV. It cost him over $200,000. He had to hire a specialized team just to disassemble it, transport it to the barn, and reassemble it. He told the movers he was printing brochures for a grocery store chain. Once the machine was set up, Frank became a hermit. He practically lived in that barn. The process was excruciating. Counterfeiting is not about printing. It's about chemistry. He had to mix the inks by hand. He had to match the specific shade of treasury green. And then there was the color-shifting ink. On a real $20, the number 20 in the corner changes color. This ink is highly restricted. It is made by a company in Switzerland that only sells to governments. Frank couldn't buy it, so he had to make it. He found a supplier in China who sold automotive paint with color-shifting properties. He bought the pigment, brought it back to the barn, and spent weeks mixing it with varnishes and dryers until he replicated the exact chemical shift of the US dollar. He was a mad scientist. But there was one final hurdle: the serial numbers. Every bill needs a unique serial number. If you print the same number on every bill, you get caught immediately. Frank bought an old letterpress, a machine from the 1900s. He bought a mechanical numbering block that would automatically click forward one digit after every stamp. Click-clack, click-clack. He spent 16 hours a day feeding sheets of paper into the machine. The fumes were toxic. The cold was biting. But the stack of money was growing. When the first perfect sheet came off the line, Frank held it up to the light. He saw the watermark. He saw the strip. He felt the snap. It wasn't just money. It was art. He dubbed it the supernote. Now Frank had a warehouse full of money, $250 million. But counterfeit money is worthless if you can't spend it. And Frank was smart enough to know he couldn't spend it himself. If he started buying Ferraris and mansions with cash, the IRS or the Canadian equivalent would come knocking. So, he became a wholesaler. He reached out to contacts in the criminal underworld, the Irish mob in Montreal, the biker gangs, Asian triads. His pitch was simple: I will sell you $1 million in US cash for $300,000 in real money. 30 cents on the dollar. It was an incredible deal for the gangs. They could take the fake cash to Las Vegas, mix it into the casinos, buy drugs in Miami, or ship it to Europe. The gangs loved it. The quality was so high that even the pen test, the iodine marker cashiers use, didn't work. Frank had coated his bills in a thin layer of hairspray and chemical sealant that fooled the pens. Business was booming. Frank was moving millions a week. He was burying cash in the ground. He was laundering it through shell companies. He was the king of the underworld. But the sheer volume of the operation was his downfall. The US economy started to notice. Banks in Florida and Nevada started flagging weird $20 bills. They sent them to the Secret Service lab in Washington, D.C. The forensic analysts were shocked. These weren't the usual cheap fakes printed on an HP DeskJet. These were sophisticated. The chemical analysis of the paper pointed to Europe. The ink pointed to Asia. The Secret Service realized they were dealing with a massive industrial operation. They traced the distribution networks. The trail led back to criminal groups in Montreal. The Secret Service called the RCMP Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
You have a factory up there. Find it.
They didn't arrest him. They followed him. They watched him meet with Frank's distributor. They followed the distributor. And eventually, they followed the supply chain all the way back to the quiet, snow-covered barn in Trois-Rivières. They set up surveillance. They watched Frank coming and going at odd hours. They used thermal cameras and saw the heat signature of the massive printing press running hot in the middle of the night. They had him. On the morning of May 23, 2014, Frank was sleeping in his girlfriend's apartment. Police! Search warrant. A SWAT team blew the door off the hinges. Flashbangs went off. Frank was thrown to the ground and handcuffed before he could even open his eyes. Simultaneously, another team raided the barn. They found everything: the Heidelberg press, the plates, the ink, the paper scraps, and nearly $1 million in finished $20 bills that were waiting to be shipped. It was the smoking gun. It was an open and shut case. Frank was hauled into an interrogation room. The lead investigator slammed a stack of evidence on the table.
We have the press. We have the paper. We have the bills. You are done, Frank.
The prosecutors told him they were working with the U.S. authorities. They were discussing extradition. Frank's blood ran cold. If he was extradited to the U.S., he would be charged with counterfeiting U.S. currency and undermining the national security of the United States. The sentence for that could be up to 60 years. He would die in an American concrete box. But Frank Bourassa was a gamer. He knew the system, and he knew something the police didn't. Frank sat in the cell and did the math. The police had found $1 million in the barn, but Frank had printed $250 million. He had already sold maybe $50 million. That meant there was roughly $200 million missing. The police didn't know where it was. Frank's lawyer requested a private meeting with the prosecutors. The lawyer delivered a message that stunned the room.
My client is willing to cooperate, but here is the situation. You found $1 million. That's cute. But Frank has $200 million more stashed in a secure location. If you send him to prison, that money is going to disappear.
The threat hung in the air. If Frank went to prison, his associates would release that $200 million into the wild. It would flood the U.S. economy. It would cause chaos. It would be a massive embarrassment for the RCMP and the Secret Service. The authorities were in a bind. Their priority wasn't just punishing Frank. It was getting the fake money off the street. Frank made an offer.
I will give you the $200 million. I will give you the printing plates. I will give you the paper. But in exchange, no extradition and no prison time.
It was an insane offer. He was asking to walk away from the biggest counterfeiting crime in history. The prosecutors deliberated for weeks. The U.S. Secret Service was furious. They wanted Frank's head. But the Canadians were practical. They wanted the money secured. Finally, they agreed. On a cold morning, Frank, still in handcuffs, guided the police to a remote location. He pointed to a storage container. The police opened it. Inside, stacked floor to ceiling, were boxes. They opened the boxes. Ha! Wow. $200 million. It was a sea of 20s. It was more cash than most of the officers had ever seen in their lives. The police confiscated it all. It took multiple trucks to haul it away. They took it to an incinerator and burned it. Frank Bourassa stood before a judge. He pled guilty to possession of counterfeit materials. The judge read the sentence.
Because of the plea deal, Frank was sentenced to time served about 6 weeks in jail after his arrest and a fine of $1,350 CAD for the possession of drugs found in his car.
The U.S. Secret Service was apoplectic, but the deal was signed. Frank was a free man. Frank Bourassa walked out of the courthouse with a smile. He had beaten the system. He had printed a fortune, and even though he turned over the bulk of it, authorities estimate he likely kept millions of dollars in real profits from the bills he had already sold. Frank never confirmed or denied keeping the money. He simply bought a nice house, started a security consulting business, and began charging companies to teach them how to spot fake money. He became a celebrity, the god of counterfeiting. When asked in an interview if he regretted his crime, Frank laughed.
I didn't hurt anyone. I just made a product. The government prints money out of thin air every day. I just decided to join the competition.
Frank proved that if you commit a crime, Make sure it's so big that the government can't afford not to make a deal with you. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story of high-stakes crime, hit the like button and subscribe. And next time you look at a $20 bill, check the ink. It might be one of Frank's. See you in the next one.